Richard, how would you describe the new leadership paradigm?
The new leadership paradigm is really a new way of being in the world. And by that I mean it's a way of being where we shift from I to we. We shift from what's in it for me to what's best for the common good. Being the best for the world rather than the best in the world. So there's a significant shift in terms of why I am leading the organization and how I lead an organization. It's more focused on how can we, as an organization, create something that is sustainable for humanity.
What was it that inspired you to write the new leadership paradigm?
When I first got the idea to write the book, I resisted it. I thought to myself, well, why would I want to write a book on leadership when there are so many books on leadership already out there? And to prove the point to myself, I went to Amazon.com and I did a search on leadership. And believe it or not, there were 300,000 books on leadership. And then I thought, well, let me narrow down my search a little bit. So I added words to the word leadership. These words being sort of a nexus of topics around leadership that I thought were important. I actually found only 8 books. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should write a book on leadership. And then I had another idea. And I thought, well, you know, who's writing about leadership? And I thought, there's Jack Welch and there's Donald Trump and there's many other people. And I thought, so what are they writing about? So I bought some of their books and I analyzed them. And because we have a way of mapping values to 7 levels of consciousness, I thought, well, let me map the values of these authors, these leadership authors, to our model to see where they're operating from. Every author of each one of those books was writing about leadership from the levels of consciousness at which they operated from. And so having a model which has 7 levels of consciousness, 7 levels of leadership consciousness, I know what it takes to be a full spectrum leader. That is to be able to operate at all levels of consciousness. And so what was missing for me was the fact that even though many of these authors were covering different levels of consciousness very well, there was nobody writing from a full spectrum approach. So I began to think to myself, okay, maybe I shouldn't resist this idea so much. Maybe this is a calling. Maybe I should really focus on writing this book. And so I thought, well, I'll get started and see what happens. Well, as I got into it, the whole thing just flowed. It was a journey which was really important to me because as I was moving forward down this path of writing the book, I was realizing that there was so much more to it than a book. Because I thought, well, the book's all well and good, but as I was covering certain topics, I realized there was a crisis of leadership in the world and that we needed to have some way of increasing the number of people in the world who could be trained in leadership development. Because what I realized was that leadership development is really for the rich elite. There's millions of people in the world who could benefit from a world-class leadership development system. So instead of it just being a book, I thought, well, I'm going to add to the book. I'm going to create a website that anybody in the world can go to and learn about leadership development. And then I got the idea of including downloadable leadership learning modules, one for leading self, really about personal transformation, one for leading a team, leading an organization, and leading in society. And gradually that whole idea evolved into what I would call the new leadership paradigm learning system.
Why is a new leadership paradigm actually necessary?
The problems of existence for humanity in the last few decades have become global. 50, 60 years ago, problems of existence for communities were really national. But now they're global. And I realized that we don't really have a national arrangement for solving these problems. what we have is we have nations who are trying to resolve global issues. And the problem is that many of these nations, and even the developed nations of the West, are still operating out of their own self-interest. In fact, all of the nations are. It's very difficult to get all of the nations together to cooperate for the global common good, to cooperate for humanity as a whole, to cooperate for the planet. Because they're still operating out of this self-interest. What's in it for me? What's in it for us?
Who is going to use the new leadership paradigm learning system?
I decided to make this learning system available to everyone. The book can be purchased by anyone. The website is free, so people can go to the website and learn about the new leadership paradigm. And there are 4 learning modules. Leading self, leading others, that's leading a team, leading an organization, and leading in society. And so each one of these modules has a downloadable workbook and journal. And in the workbook are a series of exercises that you can do, your team can do, your organization can do, and or the community that you work with can do. And so there's a process by which you can grow and evolve by doing these exercises, and as you do the exercises and investigate more deeply who you are, who your team is, who your organization is, you can record all of these in the leadership journals that go with the workbooks. So there will be leadership journals and workbooks for each of the 4 modules that you can download, and these will be downloadable just at a small cost. I really wanted to make this available to anyone, and so if there is somebody on the planet, and maybe there are in developing countries, people who can't afford the cost of the book and the cost of the learning modules, we're absolutely happy to send it to them free of charge, so that it's available for everyone. But the learning system, the leadership development learning system itself, is a state-of-the-art system, and so I imagine it will also be taken up by organizations all over the world who want a first-class leadership development system. It'll be taken up by the public sector too, and also by universities who want to have a cutting-edge leadership development program as part of their offering for self-study and for facilitated study.
If I was a young professional wanting to use your system, what would I do?
We would really recommend that you start with leading yourself, because until you've learned how to lead yourself, you really can't lead other people. And then when you've done the module on leading self, you'd move on to the module on leading a team or leading other people. And when you've done that module, you could move on to the module of learning to lead an organization. So it's a graduated system. And it's also customizable because in the workbooks there are many exercises. There's like over 40 exercises in the Leading Self journal. And if you want to include all the exercises, you could do, or if you don't, you could eliminate some of them. So some of the trainers and some of the coaches who'll be using this system with the people that they're working with may change decide to change some of those exercises, and that's fine. It's not a problem. So I imagine that if it was used in an organization, I imagine that people would spend 3 or 4 weeks or maybe 6 weeks doing some of the exercises, because you can do them on your own, and then they'd meet with a facilitator for 2 or 3 days, and the group would share experiences, and then they'd go off and do the same again. If you're an individual, you might actually meet up with other friends and do it as a shared study exercise. The arrangements are many. You can use it more or less in any way you can.
You've worked closely with leaders all over the world. You've built a very successful organization yourself. What would you say is the secret to building a high-performance organization?
Well, I think there are several keys to building a high-performance organization, but from what I've seen, working with some of the leadership teams of very large companies all over the world, is there's one factor above all others in the leadership team that is really necessary, and that's trust. You've got to have a team, a leadership team, that you, as the leader of the organization, can trust. And they have to be able to trust you, and they have to trust each other. When you've got trust, it means you can have difficult conversations, you can be honest with each other, and I would call that internal cohesion. You've got to have that sense of internal cohesion. So for me, that's the first requirement. But the second requirement, I think, which is also just as important is to focus on the culture of the team or the organization. The culture will define your success. I say this, cultural capital is a new frontier of competitive advantage. When you've got people who can work together and in an open and way and in an authentic way, with integrity and trust, you will find that you will be able to create a high-performing team.
Is there a secret to great leadership?
I think many people think there are secrets to great leadership. But when you look at all the research, there isn't one single factor that comes out above all others. But there is one thing that I think is important above all others, and that is to live who you are, to become all you can become, to recognize that within you there is a spark of something that wants to get out into the world, and to work on that and allow that to happen, to find what you're passionate about and to devote your energy to whatever that is. Because if you can find what you're passionate about, you'll be full of creativity. You'll be inspiring other people. So finding your passion and finding what is in you that really wants to come out into the world, I think is the key to being a successful leader.
I've heard you talk about the 3 mantras of business. What actually are they?
Well, the first mantra is cultural capital is a new frontier of competitive advantage. If you want to have a high-performing, successful organization, you've got to have a great culture. I mean, there are many organizations now that compete to be one of the best companies to work for. And when you look at the financial results of these companies, who are the best companies to work for, you find the results are exemplary. And why? Well, it's simple, because they're looking after their employees, and their employees then are looking after the company. So if you can focus on the personal fulfillment of your employees, you will actually build a highly successful company. And that's all about the culture. So the second mantra links to that, because the second mantra is organizational transformation begins with the transformation of the leaders, because the culture of an organization is actually a reflection of leadership consciousness. So who you are as a leader actually creates the culture. Who your leadership team is creates the culture. So if you want to change the culture, you either change your team or the team changes. The team changes its behavior. So that second mantra is really about transformation of the leaders. Third mantra fits in with the other two, not surprisingly. It's about measurement. Measurement matters. Whatever you measure is what you get. So if you're totally focused on the bottom line and the short-term results, that's what your culture will look like. And it'll be fear-driven. Whereas if you measure the culture and you measure leadership performance and you measure engagement, when you start to measure these things and focus on them, they will improve. Obviously, you've got to take measures to do that, but simply focusing on them and having people realize this is important, then you will see improvements in those areas. I think that's been part of the success of our organization, is that we're able to measure the cultures of organizations by mapping values, and the organizations that have mapped their values regularly on an annual basis have seen amazing improvements in their performance. They've really moved into being high-performance organizations. The new leadership paradigm learning system includes the tools and the surveys for measuring your progress, both personally as a leader and for measuring the progress of your team, your organization, or your community. So by mapping the values of all of these groups, you can see how they're evolving and how they're growing. So it allows you to plan a trajectory for improving the performance of the group that you're working with.